Good morning, nerds. I have Max Jenis from Policy Engine back in the nerd zone because Max was telling me, hey, we have this new thing. It's pretty cool. And, Max always brings demos and data. So that's like catnip for this channel. Hello, nerds. Max.
Hello, nerds.
How have you been, man?
Good. Yeah. I think we talked like a year ago or so, and it's been a
Yeah.
pretty interesting year. Starting up Policy Engine in more earnestness and getting into the US. We just launched some new features, which I'm excited to talk about. So, yeah.
Excellent. Before we get into what's new with Policy Engine and the new features, I was curious to get your read on the fact that we have a lot of inflation now and the kind of narrative for basic income. Because in a way, when Yang was talking about it years ago, inflation was like, oh, that'll never happen. It's like zero interest rates. And now, obviously, we're in a different environment. What do you say when people say, oh, I was for UBI or I might be for UBI, but it'll only make inflation worse?
Well, UBI would make inflation worse if we don't pay for it. But Andrew Yang, his plan, it was actually the first analysis we did at the UBI Center back in 2019, I think. And found it didn't fully pay for itself, but it paid for a lot of itself. And if we had a value-added tax, if we raise income taxes, Yang talked about carbon tax, you can put all those together into a budget-neutral plan, and then you're not injecting money into the economy the way that we did with the American Rescue Plan and some of the other proposals to really keep people afloat during that time. But I think the evidence does suggest that that contributed to the inflation we're seeing today.
Yeah, so if I had to summarize it, it sounds like as long as for every dollar you distribute as part of basic income, you're taking that money in the form of tax receipts, then you're not introducing more inflation. But if you just print money and give it out to people, yeah, that would be bad. And it's important to kind of separate how you pay for basic income.
Yeah, and this is actually the modern monetary theory view, is that now when you have inflation, you use the government taxation system to soak up that extra demand in the economy. So, it's never a popular time to increase taxes, but now would be the time if we were to do it.
Yeah, that's interesting. So rather than increasing interest rates, you could introduce like a VAT as a way to take some of the money out of the system so it's not chasing the same number of goods.
Exactly.
Yeah. Interesting.
And actually, it would be especially nice because we're seeing a lot of consumption from people who had more savings. And so there are some proposals to just limit tax increases to the very rich. And I think this is a problem for UBI because it just doesn't raise enough revenue to fund a major program like UBI. But also, when it comes to inflation, rich people they consume less of their income.
Yeah.
So you really do want these broader based taxes in times like now.
That is just such a hard sell, Max,
Yeah,
to the
I
man
know.
on the street.
But inflation is, it's an interesting political economy question, which is more unpopular, inflation or broad-based taxes. At a certain point, we're going to need one of the two.
Yeah. I mean, but if you play that out and I'm man on the street, we're telling the man on the street, hey, look, you're not happy about inflation. So I'm going to introduce new taxes that so you're going to have to pay more out of pocket, but don't worry, that money is going to be taken from everyone and then we're all going to get a basic income. So you're going to end up basically neutral and you'll have less inflation. Is that the argument?
Yeah, I think you could do something in between too. So you could, I think in normal times, you might think of just a VAT that 100% of that funds the UBI. And now maybe we don't want 100% of it going to UBI. We want some demand soaked up out of the economy. So if you gave half of it as a UBI, then you're going to see less inflation, and still people at the bottom are going to be made whole.
Yeah, and would that work out? So if I only got half back in UBI, am I sort of mainstream man on the street still going to be kept whole?
So
Because I'm
roughly, something we've seen from a number of
yeah,
studies is that roughly the bottom 6 to 7 income deciles come out ahead if
right.
you have a UBI that is funded by some broad-based tax, like a VAT or a flat income
Yeah,
tax. So if you then say, well, we're not going to make the UBI to that level, maybe you're only reaching the bottom 40% in terms of making them whole,
right.
just in terms of like nominal income.
Yeah.
But then if you consider the anti-inflationary effects, I
Yeah,
think you're
yeah.
still going to see similar, like 60, 70% of people are going to be better off.
So the bottom 40%, we're like, hey, look, you're going to be at least as good as you are now, probably a little better off in the long run. And then to the middle class, like you may pay a little more out of pocket, but your interest rates are going to be, they're not going to go out of control and inflation is not going to be out of control. So you'll be better off that way. And then the rich, you're like, well, you're rich. So you're doing all right. Like
Yeah.
you might not even notice this in terms of your lifestyle.
Right. And there
Yeah.
is some research showing that people, in terms of voting decisions, they really care about their income after prices. So their net income,
Mm-hmm.
and that's
Mm-hmm.
just how much stuff can you buy. So I think this is going to be a palatable trade. And if we get some UBI in, it's gonna be so much easier to address future changes. Sorry.
The cat wants the basic income.
That's right.
Cat's
Universal
like, let's
basic
do
cat
it.
food.
Let's go. Oh, he's got a little box.
Yeah, it's the only thing that suits him. That makes
Very, very frugal cat there.
Yeah.
No fancy, memory foam
We
bed
tried
for him.
even getting a new box, and like this box is 10 years old, and
That's the
I don't
one he
want to.
likes. Good for
Yeah,
him. Good for him. It's also good, better for the environment.
that's right.
Okay. Now, I have not heard a single elected representative talk about introducing taxes as a way to combat inflation. Why? I'm guessing they just read it as it's too complicated. It's going to affect my reelection chances if I even use the word.
Yeah, yeah, that's right. There have been some prominent bloggers like Matt Iglesias who's talked about
Hmm.
doing this, but there are some tax hikes, I believe, in what's left of the Build Back Better Act, which seems like it will be pretty darn small, no climate, just really healthcare reforms.
Hmm.
But it's a tough sell, and I think it does threaten the thesis of modern monetary theory, that this is what
Mm.
you would have be an automatic, or you would ensure that every time there's inflation, there's automatic tax increases to soak up the demand. I think that's a really tough sell. One thing we can do more of is just have more pro-growth supply policy and try to just
Yeah.
reduce the barriers on production and trade and all that. Like tariffs, there have definitely been
Hmm.
some elected officials who've talked about cutting tariffs, which goes the opposite direction. But tariffs are so distortionary that it could actually help.
Yeah. Oh, you mean increasing? Are you saying? I thought by reducing tariffs we would get more supply.
That's right.
Right.
Yeah,
Okay.
we will. Yeah.
Hmm. But that's also not a politically easy argument to tell people, oh, I want to have less tariffs on China. Like people will kind of instinctively feel like, hey, that's not fair.
Well, we have tariffs not just on China. We have them on a whole host of
Right.
countries. So, we could reduce tariffs on Canadian lumber. There was
Hmm.
just actually on Friday, um, the House Democrats passed a new defense authorization bill, and part of this is making it so that if you have an offshore wind plant, you cannot hire people who are not American residents or nationals. So this is it's going to make wind energy more expensive. It's going to increase inflation in general by just making it harder to produce the energy we need. So we can at least, in my view, stop trying to do things that are going to make it worse.
Yeah. I think ultimately these things like reducing tariffs on foreign suppliers, increasing taxes, while you could argue, and it makes sense when you think about it, why that would help with inflation, it's just politically like so unpalatable. On a bumper sticker, like nobody's gonna cheer for lowering tariffs on foreigners, right? Or nobody's gonna cheer for more taxes. Maybe that's part of the problem is like with monetary theory, it's elegant in that there are these like counteracting mechanisms, but those mechanisms may be politically like not realistic. Um, if
Yeah.
anything, like I was just thinking a few years ago, if we passed legislation that said, oh, there's no inflation, but in the future, if there were, we will introduce these measures, I think people might be like, oh, sure, whatever. Like there's never going to be inflation. But now that it's real, it's almost like a triggering legislation like the pro-life people did for abortion stuff. Like we could have introduced some more auto correction legislation when we didn't need it, but now that we need it, harder sell.
Yep. Yeah, I'm curious what you think. Like, what would you have us do to combat inflation? Yeah.
Oh my God, Max.
Am I allowed to do this on the show? I don't know.
Yeah, of course, of course. I think it's a fun one. I mean, I would definitely advocate for more supply. So I would probably look at reducing tariffs. So I agree with that. Now, I think I would find it harder to get behind increasing taxes just because I don't think America is ready for that now. I think that would be something we'd only do when we didn't need it, kind of, um, you know, related to the last comment. Um, I also think that maybe 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 there's something around we as consumers need to think about delaying some purchases that we don't have to do, like self restrict our demand a little bit because as we all learned in econ 101, like inflation is too much money chasing too few goods. So let's chase goods less. We don't need to buy, you don't need to have an Amazon box in front of your house every day. I mean, but there's definitely that happens sometimes with some people, so if we could be more efficient about our own purchasing, I think that would be a good thing. I do worry a little bit that, okay, well, is that going to deepen the recession? So there was definitely a balancing act there. I also think it doesn't help that there is this war in Europe, being committed by one of the largest fuel suppliers
For sure.
or energy suppliers. Like that's totally not helpful. And then it also doesn't help that China has taken such a kind of draconian approach to their COVID stuff where it's affecting, factory output. So I'm hoping that over time we get to some little more stability in Europe, that China opens up the spigot on its production. I understand why everybody's mad at Biden for meeting with the Saudis, but if as a result of those meetings, there's a little movement on OPEC to make some more supply available, I think that would be great. So yeah, I think I would go for a lots of medium-sized things approach versus a, hey, we're going to introduce a VAT approach, right now. Like I'm worried that America's not, because like in sales, they say if you have to explain, like you've lost. And our earlier conversation, like while it's amazing for Nerds for Humanity podcast, like every man does not want to go through that 3-step process. So, oh, well, why would it help inflation? And how does that work? And da da da. So no easy answers on my part, but some things I would advocate for a lot of little things and
Yeah.
patience.
Yeah, and on the China issue, there's a lot. Maybe the biggest thing we can do at home is just speed up the vaccine development for these new variants. But it's good to see the FDA is moving a bit faster on that, but I think Biden could still push them to just approve
Yeah.
that stuff faster.
Yeah, I was noticing in news reports that the vaccination rate in China is not that great. I guess because they took the zero COVID kind of strategy. But hopefully their scientists are realizing that with these new mutations, the sort of transmissibility is so high that zero COVID is just like not possible. It's like zero crime. Like you're never going to get there.
Yeah.
Uh, so tell me what's going on with Policy Engine and UBI Center.
Yeah. So the UBI Center, we started building this tool for the UK. We started expanding to the UK a couple years ago, and we wanted to have some system that would let us experiment with different policy reforms, including UBI. And as we did that, we found that there was actually kind of a tool that could be applied more broadly. It doesn't have to just be UBI. So we put a front end on it and then we called it Policy Engine. In October, we then made that a new organization, a new nonprofit. So it doesn't just have to be for UBI. And then in March, we built that and released it for the US. And just a couple of weeks ago, we launched a US impact page. So basically, our mission is to compute the impact of public policy for the world. And that means you can design a tax benefit reform. You can see what the impact is on your own household after you've designed that reform. And you can see how it affects things like the budget, poverty rate, inequality, all that sort of just within your browser for free.
Well, Max, is this a idea or is it actually a product that is out there? Like where are we at in the product development process?
It's out there. Yeah.
Oh,
so
is it? Can you do a demo?
I can.
I love it.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure if this policy is possible, but selfishly, I would be curious about what would happen if we had a VAT in California. But if there's other policies that are better to demo, I'm happy to look at whatever you think it makes sense.
I have to doubly disappoint you. So we are working on California. This is something that hasn't been done before. So there are a couple models, mostly private ones, that look at just the tax system in the US. We're the first to also look at the benefit system. So you can reform SNAP and kind of broadband subsidies, those programs. And also we're now starting to go state by state so you can model different states. So far, we only have Massachusetts and Washington, but we're actually starting to work on California. But also
Washington State or DC?
Washington State.
Okay, can you do VAT in Washington State or no
we
VAT?
Don't have a VAT yet. So we're focused on the income tax system for now.
Okay. Well, let's look at Washington State. I used to live in Seattle.
Cool. Yeah.
Now, Washington State's an interesting one if you want to talk about taxes. They are kind of awesome for not having a lot of taxes.
Yeah, they basically don't have an income tax. They do have a capital gains tax that they just implemented, but it's at 7% actually, so pretty steep. But you can deduct $250,000 of capital gains. So it's really just for the super rich.
Yeah.
And they also implemented a tax credit called the Working Families Tax Credit. But that's part of why we did it soon. It was pretty easy.
Yeah. Cool. So does the share thing work on your end?
Yeah.
Or do you want
I think so. Let's see. I'll probably just do it from this same window.
All right, I'm going to add your window to the stream now.
Okay. So yeah, if you go to policyengine.org, this is the site. So we have Policy Engine UK and Policy Engine US now. So this.
Why did you start UK first, out of curiosity?
The UK is pretty receptive to UBI.
Okay.
And also, I was just kind of hiring for researchers and found this great researcher in the UK. His name is Woodruff, and we ended up becoming the co-founders of Policy Engine together.
Cool. All right.
Yeah. So this is the Apple zoom in a bit. So sort of the first page you go to at policyengine.org/US, this is all the levers of the public policy that we implement. So by default, it shows you just the income tax schedule for the US, and you can also adjust the bracket thresholds. But if you go here on the left, you'll see we've got a whole bunch of other parameters. Child tax credit's been in the news, so we can change the eligibility by age.
Ooh, can you change Social Security eligibility by age?
No, we
Okay.
don't have that yet.
Because there's been talk about increasing the age and retirement and that kind of thing.
Yeah, that's a tricky one because to do the modeling, you have to basically have everyone's full earnings history to see what they would get from it. We do have actually the Supplemental Security Income Program from the Social Security Administration. So that's like more for low-income people, but we don't have Social Security benefits.
I realize, Max, I'm being the worst demo audience possible. So let me just sit back and you show us what you think makes sense.
No, this is great. Just kind of wanted to really show the breadth of what we have here in terms of lots of different credits. We can also change these benefit programs. And like SNAP right now has lots of different enhancements for COVID. And then we have the state governments too. So we've got some parameters for Massachusetts. We can change like the exemptions, and then we'll have California there at some point. And then the last thing, we've got the UBI Center. So if you want a UBI, you would go to our section and define UBI for each age. And then essentially, once you've designed your policy, you get to go to the population impact page. So this is the thing we just launched a couple weeks ago. So this basically connects that policy reform to a representative survey data set. So for every household in that survey, and there's like 100,000 households, we're going to simulate the impact of that reform on them and then see what the impact is on poverty, all those kind of things once you aggregate it. And there's like a personalized calculator. So you can enter information about your household, and it's going to tell you how much this is going to affect your taxes and benefits as well. So let's see, we can, probably we could go Washington. I think where we're most robust right now is these federal reforms. So and actually there's the thing we put into the blog post where we announce this is Representative Rashida Tlaib and Mondar Jones. They put out a policy called the End Child Poverty Act. And this would replace a couple of existing child tax credits with a single child allowance that's universal. So we could look at that. We could look at a UBI if you want, funded
let's do the child tax credit. And one quick aside, I think I saw an article recently. Is it true that Mitt Romney had been advocating for a pretty robust kind of direct cash benefit of some sort in the past, maybe through a child tax credit? Is that fair?
Yes. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
And we haven't fully got everything in there to model that yet. But essentially what he proposes is a fully budget neutral plan. So that replaces the existing child tax credit and EITC with a flat child benefit plus sort of a tax credit for earners. So disconnecting, because right now the EITC, Earned Income Tax Credit, that is mostly tax credit for families with children. So if you separate the child component out of that, you can make this single, much easier to understand UBI. And then he funds that by repealing the state and local tax deduction. There's a head of household deduction or head of household status, which confers some tax benefits, and a couple other programs.
That's so cool. Mitt Romney is like the Republican Andrew Yang in that I feel like he's trying to get at the same thing. He's doing it in a much more kind of fiscally maybe conservative way, but yeah, it's a shame that he's kind of a little bit of outcast in the Republican Party now, but he seems like a sensible guy.
Yeah, I think he did get another. So he introduced this plan. It's called the Family Security Act. about a year ago, or maybe a year and a half ago, and he just reintroduced it a couple months ago, and he reintroduced it with, I think, 1 or 2 other co-sponsors. So it's not just him beating this drum now, but it is, I think conservatives view child benefits potentially a lot more favorably than universal unconditional benefits for adults.
Yeah. Well, maybe we could start there, and especially given obviously the abortion stuff, like if you're really pro-life, then help support the kids as well, not just pre-birth kind of stuff. Anyway, let's talk about let's see the robustness of the pop impact analysis.
All right, cool. So I'm just going to jump to the blog, actually.
Okay.
We have a link to, so our blog post kind of goes through this whole change.
And I've linked to that in the description for those watching on replay.
Yeah. Comments. Uh-oh. Can I do this?
I can put it in the comments.
Oh, you did. Okay, great. Yeah, thanks.
Yeah.
All right. So yeah, this has a link to the simulation. So this kind of, as you change the policy, it will generate this shopping cart of policy reform. So the End Child Poverty Act is kind of complicated. There's a whole, it looks like there's about 20 different provisions in the bill, which you can see just by going through here. But the most important part is that you can just go to a link that someone puts out for some new policy, and you can immediately see the impact on the budget. So poverty falls 28%. It's relatively expensive, $240 billion. So Mitt Romney's would be 0, and 71% of the population comes out ahead. By design, they actually designed this to make sure that people don't come out behind. So yeah, and then we've got different parts of breaking down each of those numbers. So
the $250 billion in net cost, or $243 billion in net cost. I mean, that is an example of the government spending money that it hasn't collected.
Yes. Yeah. So it's partially offset by some tax reforms. So the benefit outlays, that's like $350 billion. And then you offset 100 of that.
Yeah.
But yeah, this sort of needs some extra funding if it's to avoid increasing inflation, for example.
Yeah. Like, what would the impact be if we did something that was budget neutral?
Yeah, I love it. So this is, I think, exactly the kind of question that we're trying to help answer. So if we go back to the policy page, we can sort of, in computer science terms, like we can fork this policy, and let's just increase some tax rates until we get to something that's a little closer to budget neutral. So for example, we could bump up the bottom couple tax rates to 15%. This probably won't fully offset it, but we can very quickly just see what happens if you revise this proposal that's come out. And we can try some other.
What was it before? What we brought it to 15. What was it prior?
It was a 10% and 12% were the bottom two rates.
So now we're going to have to convince people that you're going to get some benefits here. Oh, shit. And now 37% came out behind.
Yep.
I mean, that's the thing. If you want to introduce policy where no one comes out behind, like, someone's got to pay for it.
Yeah.
And it's generally like, now it's going to be the government printing more money and dumping it into a hot economy that's already dealing with inflation. Like, this is, I think the music has stopped. Like, you can't just keep doing this, right?
Yeah, that's right. I think you can't, it's probably impossible to have a policy that leaves nobody worse off. But like, if we look at who's coming out, child poverty is falling 55% still. So kids overall are doing better. This is a very progressive reform still. So, if you're in the top 40%, you might lose a bit, like less than 1% of your total income.
Yeah. Actually, yeah, that's true. Okay. So one thing about that number that comes out behind, it doesn't really capture the magnitude of how far you come out behind.
Yeah, so we've got a chart for that.
All
So
right.
here's this one. So we break people down by decile into how far behind or ahead they come out. So actually, basically, nobody loses more than 5% of their income as a result of the reform.
That's a great talking point. No one loses more than 5%. But even in this example, we're still not budget neutral.
Yeah. Should we try a little harder?
Yeah, let's do, like, I know it sounds crazy, but let's explore a world where we only do things that we can pay for.
Yeah.
This alternate universe.
So I think if we bump these to 17%, we'll probably get there. Let's see. And in the future, I think you can imagine a button on each of those parameters, which is let's just adjust that until we get budget neutral.
Right.
So we'll probably do that at some point.
Yes, it's the do the right thing button.
Yeah. Hey, now we've done even better.
Oh, wow, we've reduced the debt. I love it.
That's right. And still, most people come out ahead.
Yeah, and then what's the talking point for no one will be more than N% behind?
Let's see. Okay, so we don't quite have that anymore. 3% of people lose more than 5%.
Okay, 3% lose more than 5%. And then is there a way to say no one will be more than 10% worse off or something?
We don't have that right now. These are kind of targets, but
yeah, I think the talking point we would want is half of the people are going to be better off. Of the other half, almost all of them are going to be impacted less than 5%. And some small percent, N% are going to be impacted by about 10%,
Yeah.
Then I think people will be like, oh, okay, number one, it's not me. They're probably thinking to themselves. And number two, if you happen to be wealthy, then it's like, well, it's probably a few percent difference. Like people may not notice, the wealthy people.
Yeah, and I'd add more than 1 in 5 people is gaining more than 5% of their income. So this is a major boon to a whole bunch of people.
Yeah.
Especially over half, 3/4 of people in the bottom decile gain more than 5%.
Yeah. That's cool. So is there a world where when there's a hot legislative debate going on, there's a policy engine PDF that gets shared around saying, hey, we've run the numbers. Here's how it impacts the population. And ideally, maybe you already have this. Hey, go to Policy Engine and you can enter your info and we'll tell you what will happen to you.
I stopped sharing too soon, I think. That's exactly what we want to do. So right now you can actually, a policymaker could embed these charts on their website. They could embed a link. They could also embed the household calculator. So just very easily see what the impact of that reform is.
Love it.
That is our goal. Whether policymakers do that in advance or not, I think we can encourage them to do it by just empowering anyone to have that information. So ideally within an hour of some policy announcement, someone out there has done the actual implementation of the policy and it's going to be out there. And ideally the media covers it. So they will want to get ahead of it and actually use it in the design.
Yeah. I think if Policy Engine itself also for like the big, huge headline legislation, set it up and had it like pre-saved as a pre-wired report. Number one, I would be more confident because I'd be like, well, I don't know if Joe Blogger knows how to use Policy Engine right.
Yeah, right.
And
Yeah.
number two, like it's people are lazy and you want to be as fast as possible. So, but that's a super exciting. It's great work that you're doing. What's been the have you started shopping this around, or I guess it's since you're a nonprofit, are you selling it or is it a free tool for everybody? How's that work?
Right now it's free. It's completely open source. So yeah, we are a nonprofit. We have some support from a think tank in Utah called the Center for Growth and Opportunity. So they're funding our development of all the 50 state tax and benefit models. Um, and over time, we're thinking of having a pro version where it's easier
Mm-hmm.
to share policies just within your organization privately.
Mm-hmm.
And but for now, we're excited to just make it available to anyone and have it as accessible as possible.
So what's the reception like when you talk to congressional staffers and you say, "Hey, I've got this way to help your representative like understand the full implications." Like, do they are they able to grok what you're doing and are they interested or how's that work?
Yeah, actually, we talked
Yeah.
with a staffer for Representative Tlaib about this proposal,
Uh-huh.
and he was incredibly. I hope I'm not overstating it if he's watching, but he's really excited because if you're in Congress, you would think they have tons of
Yeah.
resources to do this kind of analysis. Not really. You have to wait. The Congressional Budget Office or Joint Committee on Taxation, they only do a few policies a year. So if you have something that's at the early exploratory stage, you don't
Mm.
really have access to that. So they've, I think, really been searching and waiting for a tool like this.
Oh, so the way it currently works is they have to wait for this huge CBO study and it's almost too late when people are starting to talk about it. Interesting.
And it comes
Yeah.
out after you have to actually announce it. So if you're just
Right.
exploring policies internally, you don't want to share your idea making process yet.
Yeah.
Right?
Test and learn. This is great. So
Exactly.
that's fantastic. So I'm glad to hear that you're getting some positive reception because I was having lunch with a friend and he does not work at my current employer, but he does work in the tech industry. And he had just come back from DC meeting with member or like congressional staffers about like industry stuff. Um, and he was commenting that the representatives don't seem to be super familiar with the details and nuances of like different industries,
Yeah.
and that the staffers, many of them are pretty like they're a couple years out of like the K school or something. Like they're
Yeah.
smart, but they're not experts in everything either. And so it's good to know that maybe Policy Engine will empower people with some more tools so that they can hopefully make the right calls.
Yeah. I think we believe and hope that this can improve policymaking because once you have a tool that can do this kind of estimation, you don't have to rely on the lobbyists as much. You don't have to rely
Yeah.
on sometimes pretty slanted advocacy organizations that find a researcher who's willing to
Yeah, yeah,
craft
yeah.
the policy in the way that makes it look great for them. This allows you to do apples to apples comparison from a single trusted consistent source that then the lawmaker knows that the public's actually going to see this too,
Yeah.
right?
You guys should do like a partnership with like PolitiFact or something and
That's a great idea.
where right? Because like right now some legislation comes out and to your point like the advocates have a pretty biased and they've got conflicts of interest so they're going to paint it in the most positive light possible. But like what we were just talking about, this what we were looking at legislation for child tax credit, is that what we were just looking at?
Yeah,
Yeah. Like sounds great, but I don't know if everybody gets that this is going to increase the deficit by 240 billion.
sure.
Like that's an annual cost, right? So
Mhm.
it's trillions over a decade, right? And
Yeah,
so I have a feeling that as much as I would like the staffers and representatives to use it, and I hope they do, I have a feeling maybe the media and journalists may be our best bet
yeah,
because then they have a story to tell, which is like, hey, there's more to this then the headlines are saying, like, it's not that this isn't a good idea, but you should just know that this is the impact. Or like, oh, this legislation uh unexpectedly, like, seriously harms people in this state,
Hmm.
or it amazingly benefits people in this other state. And that kind of visibility may not be known, and may not be the incentives may not be for the representatives to kind of push that information out, but hopefully journalists will. So that's exciting. It's great that you're doing this stuff, man. Anything else that we should hit about Policy Engine before we wrap up?
No, I think just to that point, it's I think the most likely theory of change is what you're talking about, where you start with the media, maybe think tanks as well, and maybe they're
Mm-hmm.
coming at it from a critical lens. But then once you have that culture, then the policymakers know they can't get away from it, and then they start using it to preempt it. But it is like a slight worry that if you have more of these detailed analysis tools more broadly available, um, it's going to increase gridlock because everyone's going to identify, oh, I'm the person
Yeah.
who comes out behind. And even if it's like
Yeah.
2% of the population, they're going to
Yeah.
get loud about it.
Yeah.
I think we're optimistic that still the benefits outweigh the costs, but we'll see.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it will require the country for federal legislation to be able to do things that are in the best interests of the entire country, and know that that means not everybody comes out ahead. It
Mm.
almost always, to do the right thing, like, you're never going to have everyone come out ahead. Like, that's sort of pretty unrealistic. Like, no one would make those decisions for their family, saying like, oh, every decision we make, everybody has to be better off. Like, you'll never get anything done. But yeah, the way our current systems is set up, like, it only takes a couple of senators to block something, though, too. So who knows?
Yeah.
But let's bet on the power of more facts and more information, and hope that you know we do make better decisions with it, and keep our fingers crossed. Max, one thing that I would suggest is, as Policy Engine continues to evolve and advance, when you see big legislative debates starting to pop up, and we can use Policy Engine to kind of unbox it a little bit, reach out to me, and I'd love to kind of go into the details with you. I think it would be really fun.
Yeah, I would love that for
All
sure.
right. With that, we'll say goodbye, nerds.
Goodbye, nerds.
Thanks, Max. I'll catch you later, buddy.
Thank you, Tom.
All right. So that was Max Jenis from Policy Engine. He is made for Nerds for Humanity. And for the 7 people watching us live, I hope you enjoyed it. I think some key takeaways are, it's amazing how we are used to passing legislation that cannot be paid for with tax revenue. And I think for a long time, we were like, it's okay, we can borrow the money at almost zero interest. And I think a lot of us were like, this feels kind of weird. This is not what I learned in econ class. And I think now we're seeing, like, well, you can't in perpetuity constantly spend and not pay for it. So that was super interesting. I think the other thing was, really enjoyed our discussion about inflation, and how, if you really don't like inflation, it does mean you have to take a little bit of I don't want to say austerity, but you've got to be a little more frugal about how much you spend and how much you buy, not just at the national level, but at the individual level. And then the third thing is, so cool that he's working on this tool that lets people dig in a little further. So Thanks, Mac, for coming on the show. How do we keep this show going? Part of it is our members, and I want to thank them. And if you're watching this on YouTube, there's a join link, and you too could support content like this and help us cover our content production and podcast storage fees and streaming costs. Although streaming is now covered by StreamYard, so thank you, StreamYard. But there's a ton of other operating costs for the Nerds channel. And Soldier One is our biggest supporter. Soldier One is a senior vice president. So thank you, Soldier One, for making this channel possible. We also have some VPs, very important. Kristen Slevin, Bike, and Stephen Jones. Thank you, Kristen, Bike, Stephen Jones, and again, Soldier One. Then we have our hardcore level. Gene, David, DK, Jackalego, Kirsch, Mr. History, Mona, Susan, Vaughn, Yang, Robert, Dean, Stat, Galessa, Jay Perrin, AH, Jay Bryan, Dana, Jason, Parth, and Daniel. And then at the entry level, which only costs $1.99 a month, is Lisa, Albert, Brandon, Arez, your mom and Sophia, Mike, Doris, Emerald, Ben, Rasta, James, Emma, Hui, Elizabeth, Ira, Shoni, Jameson, Doctor, William, Karen, Arden, Emery, Mai, Brittany, Juana, Warren, Lucky, Kevin, Nell, Toby, Walter, and Jeremy. And our youngest nerds overall, who are our newest nerds? And if you click that join link and become a nerd, you will be called out in our newest nerd section as well. Jeremy Salmons, only 6 days old. Welcome, Jeremy. Walter Tex, 1 month old, and Toby, 1 month old. And our OG nerds are Lisa Childress, Jean Lim, and Kristen Slevin. So thank you all for making the Nerds for Humanity channel possible. I want to next call out some trending candidates on ofthepeople.us, which is kind of like a Yelp for political candidates. And this webcam focus, just look at that. Look how terrible that is. Jesus, probably some of you are thinking, Tom, you should take some of this member money and invest in a new camera. Hold on, fellas. Let me see if I can adjust the focus, because like that's the Logitech. Yeah, okay. Hold on. Give me a second, guys. By the way, in the chat, tell me where you're joining in from, and I'll give you a shout out in a second. Okay, I'm going to turn autofocus off. What does this do? That doesn't help. Let me turn it back on. Autofocus on. This is poopy stinky. Autofocus off. Whatever. We're going to have to go to back to the just the built-in Apple camera. There we go. That's a little bit weird in terms of the green screen. You guys are seeing all of the sausage making. There we go. All right. Thank you, Apple, and poo-poo stinky Logitech. Logitech, if you want to send me a better camera, you know how to reach me. Because I can't afford one. All right. Maybe we get some more members. We will. All right. So ofthepeople.us, it's kind of like Yelp for political candidates, and it's sorted by recent approval voting. So let's see who are the trending candidates on OTP. All right. Top candidates are Rishi Kumar in my own district of California, running against Anna Eshu, who is a 30-year incumbent. She's been in political office for 4 decades. She was sworn into Congress when Bill Clinton was first sworn in as president. So she's been there for a while. Rishi has a 50% chance of beating her. He's one of two candidates, Anna Eshoo and him, on the general election ballot. And she only got less than 50% in the primary for the first time. Rishi is for Medicare for all. He is for term limits, and he does not take any PAC money. And he also does not support continuing with Nancy Pelosi as Speaker of the House. So he's kind of a fresh perspectives, fresh energy Democrat. Uh, Maybe a little bit on the moderate side, which for me works, especially in this economic climate. Then you got Larry Sharpe running for governor and Jermaine Johnson running for state house. Those are our top three trending. And if you're thinking, hey, why isn't Jermaine ranked higher? Or why isn't David Kim ranked higher? All you need to do is you click on their name and then click on this blue approve button, and they'll get pushed up, and then they'll get more exposure. But right now, based on your approval voting recently, you got Rishi, Larry, and Jermaine. So congrats to all of you guys. Of the People is a pure volunteer effort. The costs of like GitHub and Amazon Web Services are covered by our patrons or patrons. And our patrons in order of support are Eric S. I think I can say his name, Eric Sanchez, Tohir T, Elizabeth O, Tony P, Rockout, Iggy, Aaron S, John P, Rob, Timothy J, Jessica G, Trickle Up, Muhan Z, Travis C, Austin B, Mai Z, and Dylan JHS. So thank you to all of our patrons for helping us keep ofthepeople.us going. We actually got almost 4,000 visitors last month. So Of the People is really coming along. So if you're running for office, put your profile up there. It's free. And if you are interested in learning about new candidates, check it out. And then if you want to support people that you know on there or people that you've discovered on there that you really like, click that approve button. And we want to give some shout outs in the chat to people who shared where they're joining us from. Jeremy Salmons, who is a member, channel member from St. Louis, Missouri. I hear there are good ribs there. And Buddy Mac is from Los Angeles. I hear there's good Korean food there. So probably good Mexican food too. So I think that's it for today, folks. Thank you, nerds. If you're watching this on replay, you still have a chance to help me out by smashing that like button, sharing it on Twitter. And then if you really want to help out in addition, click that join button on YouTube and become a member. All right, folks. Goodbye, nerds.